Thanks very much for joining us today, Mr. Rees-Mogg. Obviously, we've seen today more news about the UK's relationship, shall we say, with the European Convention on Human Rights. I just wondered what your position is now that we've seen the report saying that Mr. Cameron may make some sort of compromise on it.
Well, I'm very sympathetic to the Prime Minister's position. I think it is possible to remain a supporter of the aims of the Convention without accepting the judgment of the court. That was the situation we were in historically when we first signed up. And I think to restore the status quo ante is probably the right answer. And then to allow our own judges to decide what British law says.
And do you think it's a bit of a letdown that we might not see a British Bill of Rights, though, on this news today?
Well, I think a British Bill of Rights would essentially encompass ordinary human rights. I would prefer to see it as a British Bill of Rights, and I don't think that's incompatible with remaining a signatory to the Convention, but disavowing the power of the Strasbourg Court.
And what do you say to the argument of people saying that's not do this at all, that's just stay in our current relationship where we're in the Human Rights Act and we are signed up fully to the Convention? Why not keep that as the status quo?
There are some people who think that we ought to have more international government and that we ought to be governed on a pan-European or possibly even a global basis. I don't agree with that. I think that our democracy rests with the people of the United Kingdom, and that's where our laws rest, and that's where our judges should rest. And that to have this internationalisation of human rights is a mistake.
And talking about internationalism, globalisation, another big issue is, of course, the EU referendum promised by 2017. When, in your opinion, should we hold that historic vote?
We should hold it when the negotiations have taken place, and that will take time. That, in my view, a negotiation that is hurried will not be one that achieves important changes, because the European Union is a notoriously sclerotic institution. It makes FIFA look a model of how an international body should operate, and therefore it will take time to get a good renegotiation.
And how positive are you about Mr. Cameron, the Prime Minister, getting concessions from Europe? We've already seen with Poland, they're saying they're not pro the welfare reforms that he's proposed. Do you think he's going to be able to get these big changes?
I think the British negotiating position is extraordinarily strong. We are the second biggest contributor to the EU budget. We are the only economy in Europe that's been doing well over the last few years. In Germany, but the Eurozone's been doing appallingly badly. So we've been an engine for growth for the European Union. We have a very important contribution to make in terms of international security. So for our money and power, the European Union needs us more than we need them. And the Polish government is negotiating in a way you would expect a government to negotiate. It wants to put its strongest points first, but we have to answer that.
And where do you personally stand at the moment? Because there's been a few Eurosceptic soundings from yourself. Are you holding the position you would like to see the negotiation first and then decide whether you're in or out?
Obviously, because whatever happens, the United Kingdom has to have a relationship with the European Union. So if we were to leave tomorrow, the first thing a British Foreign Secretary would do would be to go to Brussels to negotiate terms of engagement with a neighbouring bloc. That has to happen. So what we want to get is a semi-membership, an associate membership, that allows us free to govern ourselves, make our own laws, control our own borders, crucially, and not be part of a political union. Ideally, we can get that through a renegotiation, which I would then support.
Talking about immigration, I saw in your local paper, actually, you made comments saying that you felt some of the rules aren't necessarily fair, that we should be able to welcome more people over here. I just wondered if you care to elaborate on that issue.
Absolutely. Because we allow anybody to come from Europe, people can come out of prison in the European Union and walk into the United Kingdom, and there's nothing we can do about it. We are very tight on successful business people and scientists from the rest of the world, including our friends in the Commonwealth, like India, or on family members. It's very difficult to get a family member in from a Commonwealth country, but easy for anyone to walk in from the EU. I don't understand this preference for European countries against countries with which we have much deeper and closer and longer historic ties.
But do you think, because of the political reality around such a contentious issue, the government may not be able to make those reforms that you're suggesting, as in to freeing it up to outside the EU, or do you think those reforms are very possible?
Well, I think Britain should control her own borders, and that will mean some things become much tighter and other things become easier. And that's what sovereign nations do. That's what the electorate expects us to do. It's not for Brussels to determine our immigration policy. And if Brussels wants to determine our immigration policy, then we should leave.
And moving away from Brussels, Europe, bringing it to home, saw in your constituency you were able to increase the majority of the general election by quite a way. I just wondered if you could give us a bit of insight as into the main tactics that you sort of used to win over the voters.
Well, it's very hard to know what leads to particular changes in particular constituencies. I think members of Parliament need to remember that most people vote for a political party rather than for the individual. Having said that, we ran a very hard campaign. We delivered hundreds of thousands of leaflets. We knocked on countless doors. So it was a very traditional door-to-door campaign. But I was probably more benefited by what was happening nationally than what was going on locally in the end.
And bringing it back to yourself, obviously we've got 5 more years with fixed-term parliaments now. What's going to be your sort of main goal, or is there a particular piece of legislation that you would like to see passed over the Parliament?
What, other than repealing the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act, which I think is a particularly silly piece of legislation and doesn't fit our constitutional setup. I think the key task for the government is to continue with the economic reforms and then get the constitutional issues right. That the Labour government 97 to 2010 upended the constitution in all sorts of areas, the devolution settlement, the European settlement, the House of Lords, and that now all needs to settle down and to get back to a normal degree of stability. And if we can do that, and that involves the EU referendum, it involves English votes on English issues, but a new settlement for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well, if we can do that, we can create long-term stability for the United Kingdom.
Thanks very much for your time.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.